the theme of this week's discussion is centering all around International Anti-Street Harassment Week. Street harassment in the most traditional sense is usually thought of as unprovoked sexual advances or forms of goading or baiting, either verbal or physical, taking place in public spaces. The key here is that the consent of the harassed is not almost, but never given. Harassers impose themselves onto their targets, often without any form of communication or triggering their actions. Grindr is interesting in that it creates gay social spaces that are equal parts gay bar and public space, much like a street, for instance, for the argument. The key difference between a man simply walking down a street and the man walking down virtual Grindr Avenue Northwest is that the latter has opted into this unique public space. Moreover, despite the innocuous social networking categorization of the app, Grindr's public space is obviously one in which sex is one of the more common end goals. Whereas sexual come-ons or catcalls on a regular street are social faux pas, they are standard Grindr fare. So sex isn't actually the issue at hand here. I'd like to take a moment to point out that it is not uncommon, though, for interested strangers to send unsolicited photos of their genitals to people on Grindr. So you're just like on Grindr, like in class, it's happened to me. Someone just sends you like a penis, and it's like there's like a girl sitting next to you, and she's like, you're like, no. Anyway, so I argue that is street harassment, classic, but it gets a little more complicated than that. Still, even though this form of street harassment, sending random pictures to people, isn't nearly as malicious or damaging or victimizing as street harassment. My work with Grindr focuses specifically on discriminatory language of preference that is deployed in Grindr space. It is common to find phrases like no blacks, no Asians, no Latinos, no femmes, no fats, and the like, in the some 200 characters allowed in people's profiles. In the spaces for solicitation of a specific type of company or description of oneself, a disproportionate amount of profiles feature this kind of language. Let's take a queer theory detour and talk about Jacques Derrida for a minute. This is sort of the body of my paper. For those of you unfamiliar with Derrida, he is most famously known for his concept of deconstruction, which is in his book of grammatology. In short, what deconstruction really seeks to explain is that words do not exist in any context that is non-textual. When you say something, you need to take words at their face value, what it is that they are meant to mean. So when I say, I don't like you, I can argue that, well, I can nuance what I'm saying by, well, you know, I was attacked by someone who looked like you at one point. But what Derrida really tries to get at is that isn't a valid argument. Words exist in a textual vacuum that can only be understood as their literal definitions. This is particularly pertinent for cyberspaces in which physical interaction, person-to-person, speech is impossible, where communication is strictly done via text. So Derrida is perhaps best known for the development of his ideas of deconstruction in 1967 work on grammatology, blah, 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 blah. Let's see. So let's think about Grindr as it exists, literally, a geosocial network in which users communicate via text and metaphorically as a street down which individuals have chosen to set up shop to sell their wares, as it were. In following with the logic of deconstruction, the words that one chooses to use in a Grindr profile, no Asians, no rice, no yellow skins, cannot merely be understood as the author's sexual preference for those of non-Asian descent. Rather, these words must be taken literally as a linguistic embodiment of discrimination. Exclusion of A does not directly translate to a preference for B. A virtual citizen walking down Grindr Avenue is thus often subjected to multiple storefronts displaying signs of varying level of offense. No femmes, no faggots, real men only. The language here ends up becoming an exercise in normative masculine dominance in which white, fit, masculine bodies and identities are implicitly valorized by the explicit devaluation and rejection of every other form. Is this a form of street harassment? I'm not quite sure. So that was really the thrust of my paper. And then I kind of got into some metrics about the uptick in smartphone adoption by general consumers. As of 2007, entrepreneurs name payphones, record stores, and gay bars on a list of 10 businesses facing imminent extinction. According to Damron, a gay travel guide published, the number of gay and lesbian bars dropped by about 13% between 2005 and 2011. And it's thought that as gays have gained more social acceptance, we began to blend into other social spaces like straight bars. But in the vacuum, the space created by the lack of gay bars, we find these cyber-social spaces really kind of seeing greater adoption. So what's happening is, as opposed to there being physical places where gay men can interact with one another and perhaps contextualize, their preferences, they exist in these cyberspaces where, this kind of damaging language is really pervasive. So I argue that it's very problematic, and that it could become much more of a problem as the cyberspace